What's going on, y'all? It's Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and welcome to another episode of Vibrations, a TMC podcast. It's a pleasure to be back in the hot seat chatting with the TMC crew. Before we get into the conversation today, make sure you're heading to our website, techmfg.com. Again, that's techmfg.com. Not only to find other pieces of thought leadership, more resources, more episodes of Vibrations, but also to learn a little bit more about our solutions and services and how they can align with your operations. All right, folks, today, let's just get right to it. We're going to be chatting about microscope-specific vibration solutions. This is a very important market for TMC and one that, has a lot of fine-tuning and a lot of specificity around what solutions, obviously are going to be best attuned for different types of microscopes and different operations. So we're going to be exploring common vibration control methods for various microscope types. These include optical, SEM, TEM, AFM, right? And we're going to discuss some of the differences and needs for example, semiconductor failure analysis versus conventional lab use, right? And these microscopes in practical situations. We're also going to be chatting about assessing and mitigating vibration issues, right? So hopefully when you walk away from this podcast, you'll better learn how to identify or have the right framework for identifying if vibrations or other factors are impacting your work, right? The role that VC curves, for example, play in site selection, and then arm you with the strategies for addressing some of those external interference issues like construction or raised floors, etc. And last but not least, we'll also give some time to discuss the difference between custom versus off-the-shelf solutions in this space. We'll cover ergonomic and practical considerations for vibration platforms, whether suppliers provide integrated solutions, and why addressing vibration issues early is critical for your facility's long-term success, right? Identifying this early, finding the right solution, and knocking that issue off the checklist. So let's get right to it. Again, to have an open discussion here on microscope-specific vibration solutions and how to maneuver this complex field are two of our teammates from the TMC team. We're joined today by Mr. Wes Wigglesworth, Senior Applications Manager for TMC, as well as Mike Coy, Sales Manager for the Americas for TMC. Wes and Mike, welcome to Vibrations. How are y'all doing today?
Thanks, Daniel. Great to be here.
Good to see you again, Daniel.
Yeah, real pleasure getting to sit down and chat. Wes, it's been a minute. Mike, I think this is our first conversation, right, on the podcast. So good to have you joining for the first time. Always love opening the field to new voices at TMC. So real quick, just so our audience understands, what is the expertise y'all are bringing to the conversation today? What are your credentials, right? What lens are you bringing to this specific strategic discussion? Wes, if you could kick us off, just a little background on yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Daniel. So my background in education is engineering, much like many of my teammates here, either physics or engineering. But, getting into the vibration isolation world really in the late 90s here at TMC as an applications engineer, and just, working on product solutions with the applications team, but really focusing on customers and their applications and how our solutions really match up with their applications and their tools to solve really the most challenging of vibration problems, to allow, their instruments to work the way they were designed to work in challenging environments.
We're excited to pull from that experience, right? That hands-on experience to offer some education for our audience here today. And then Mike, same question for you. Give us a little background on yourself and how that's coloring the expertise and the perspectives you're going to give on the podcast episode today.
Sure, Daniel. Thanks for having me here today. My background is in material science, but I've spent the last 35 years in the EM world. So I started out doing research on low voltage SEM, looking for ways to deal with non-conductive materials. Later on, moved into product management at a company that actually makes microscopes. And eventually I moved into sales and helping people globally find solutions in the EM world for these problems that our science is facing. And One of the interesting stories is just watching how important vibration management has become as the equipment has gotten better and better over the years. So just for a quick example, cryo-EM, everybody talks about how critical cryo-EM is for handling these new viruses, for dealing with drug discovery. But this is a technique where we're averaging thousands of images together. And, a requirement like that really starts to push the need for extreme levels of vibration control. So basically, over the last 35 years, the work that TMC does has become more and more and more critical to the market. And that's kind of what led me to be here today.
And all that experience, seeing the evolution of these applications in the field is going to be key to help us understand how to make sense of the variety of microscope solutions out there today, and how different external factors and the potential vibration sources within a lab or manufacturing environment, et cetera, will determine the right strategies for choosing the right solutions. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Thanks again, Mike and Wes, for your time today. I want to start here just to kind of paint the picture of how to even get in the right headspace for choosing the right solution. Are there any general rules that y'all recommend that you've found are kind of tried and true for the industry for determining what kind of vibration solution is needed for various kinds of microscopes, right? So for instance, what's most commonly used for optical microscopes or for SEMs or TEMs or AFMs, right? So give us that general rule, kind of what's the headspace, and then we'll get a little more specific.
Before answering that question, I want to talk a little bit about the differences of vibration isolation technologies. Pneumatic springs are a very good isolator, commonly used for things like laser tables, optical tables, kind of the foundation of any physics lab or even chemistry labs. And these pneumatic springs are excellent at filtering out vibration coming from the floor or from a frame, typically at high frequencies, say 10 hertz and above or 20 hertz and above. And they're self-leveling typically, not always. And essentially, again, it's a low-pass filter. That compared to an active vibration control system, which consists of a sensor that's measuring the vibration and sending a signal, electronic signal, to an actuator, where that actuator can move, basically a micropositioner, and that actuator will move on the micrometer scale, equal to the vibration that's being measured. So it's much more sophisticated than a pneumatic spring, which is sort of passively reacting to the floor. It's filtering out floor vibration. An active system is actually measuring and canceling that vibration. Along those same lines, you have microscopes that are much more advanced and more sophisticated than others. So you mentioned optical microscope. So optical microscope or a light microscope, these are typically tabletop instruments that can magnify, say, 40x, but they can also magnify up to, say, 2000x. So these are, workhorses in a life science lab or a materials metrology lab, and you are, based on our experience and knowledge of the instruments, is that a pneumatic isolator is more than enough for that type of microscope. Sometimes even a nice solid workbench is enough for some of those lower magnification light microscopes. So that's perfectly suitable for that type of device. And by the way, those light microscopes, just for our audience, those are things like cell culture research, some materials research, looking at electronic devices, but not really doing high magnification. So when you get into high magnification, and by that I mean not just a few thousand X, but 100,000X or a million X or million times magnification, things like electron microscopes. So scanning electron microscopes, transmission electron microscopes. These are imaging tools that are resolving down to a nanometer. Advanced, resolution of these devices really demands a much more quiet environment, and at all frequencies, down to very, very low frequencies. So an active vibration control system is not just suitable, but required for those type of instruments. And when you think about the nanometer scale, it's about a billionth, or is a billionth of a meter. The SEMs that are used in, say, semiconductor manufacturing, they're looking for defects on a wafer, say a 12-inch wafer. They're looking at a defect on a part of the wafer that's going to become electronic circuit that goes into your phone. Well, to put that into perspective, imagine being on a satellite looking down on Earth, zooming in on Manhattan. You're looking basically for an ant on the island of Manhattan, and that gives you kind of a rough idea of the scale of looking for a nanometer defect or smaller on a 12-inch wafer in semiconductor manufacturing. So that really needs a very, very quiet base or floor in terms of vibration. That's where active vibration control really has its place.
An ant in Manhattan, child's play. That's easy. No, but I mean, that's a great analogy. There's no way you can, zoom in enough to try to even identify that realistically if there's even a small gust of wind moving the piece of equipment that you're using, right? To try to find that ant in, metropolitan hub. And, it just goes to show that, especially when we're talking these mission critical applications, using high-powered microscopes in lab settings, in manufacturing settings, whatever it might be, vibration control is a necessity. It's not a nice to have. It is key. So let's get a little deeper. Mike, maybe you could touch on this for us, but when we're talking about some of the general, currents that might point you in the direction of the right solution, if you're using an optical versus an SEM versus a TEM versus an AFM microscope, go ahead and get a little bit more granular for us. Describe some of the typical use cases where you see those microscopes in action, and how that determines the correct vibration solution for that microscope, for that use case. You can feel free to just kind of pick one and jump in, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. So, quite often all three microscopes are used in tandem, right? To truly understand the issues that our customers are facing, they really kind of have to look from the macro scale down to the nano scale. So most facilities that Wes and I interact with or that use our equipment really use all of these instruments, right? They're going to start with an optical microscope to get a grand sense of where things are, to try and understand simple things like surface issues that they're seeing, whether it's interfaces, whether it's just understanding how the reflectivity of the surface is acting, or to pick areas of interest to go to the next level. So like Wes mentioned, an optical microscope, you're limited by the wavelength of the source, which is light in this case. So your magnifications are fairly limited. A very basic vibration control system usually is enough to get them through to that point. Now, when you step up to an SEM, SEMs have come tremendously far in the last 30 years. A million X in an SEM now is quite possible. And the biggest difference between an SEM and a TEM, an SEM is a surface analysis tool. You're looking at the actual surface, and it's what I like to call a real image of a material. You're looking at ups and downs. You're looking at hills and valleys. You're looking at what your eye could see if you really could zoom into that ant down in Manhattan, right? That's what it would look like. It would look like an ant still. And as these instruments get better and better, our customers keep finding more and more applications to chase after, and that makes it even more complicated, right? So suddenly now we're trying to do a material analysis at an interface and a 2 nanometer semiconductor structure. So not only do we need to be able to magnify in to see this structure, we also have to keep things stable while we run say, an X-ray map to understand the composition of what's happening. So as that image acquisition time extends, the stability requirements become greater and greater. So it goes beyond magnification. And that's where the active systems that Wes talked about really become critical. We really have to have a stability way beyond what the instrument was capable of requiring 20 years ago. TEM now is a completely different situation, right? In TEM, your sample preparation has resulted in an electron transparent sample. So you're actually sending your high voltage beam of electrons through a sample material. And now we're starting to look at things like contrast due to density, whether in life sciences density is due to structure of cell walls versus open spaces, or whether it's due to, for example, tungsten being more dense than aluminum, right? The density is what's giving us our contrast. So again, now we're talking about true atomic resolution, sub-nanometer scale resolution, the absolute ultimate in vibration performances. And quite often combinations of systems are required to even come close to being stable enough to see what these people are hoping to see. In addition, now we're talking about new eras of things like low dose imaging, where we have new cameras out in the field that are capable of counting individual electrons as they strike a sample. So as you can imagine, in essence, we're working with a much less intense flashlight and still trying to see more, right? So we have to spend more and more time acquiring images, and stability increasingly is the limiting factor in what happens. So the absolute state of the art TMC systems, active systems are the only possible chance to succeed in situations like that.
Now, how does the strategy for changing the right vibration control tool change when we're talking about automated tools versus manual tools, for example? Does that change any considerations in a really tangible way? I mean, I'm sure there are nuances to every situation, but is that a key deciding factor in choosing the right solution?
Yeah, a little bit, Daniel. It's an interesting question. So the automated tools are often used actually in semiconductor environments where, they're being used in clean rooms, and, the loading of the instrument is automated by overhead transfer systems and robots. And so there's this more automated motion and loading of wafers that can affect the whole stability of the interface between the wafer and the measuring device. So in that case, it's not just vibration isolation, but stability and stiffness of the vibration isolation platform. So these instruments are being installed on platforms in the clean room and in a raised floor, and they need to be able to process quickly. They need to have high throughput, high yield as well. And any motion in the platform that is unexpected during that wafer transfer can really impact the performance of that tool and the throughput. So in that case, we really need a stiff and stable platform. And I mentioned pneumatic isolators earlier. A pneumatic isolator in that type of for that type of tool just isn't used anymore because of the sophistication of those tools and the automation and the high throughput you can imagine that's demanded in a modern semiconductor fab or factory. So yeah, I guess that's a good case of thinking about the automated tools versus, say, a conventional microscope in a conventional lab where you're loading the samples manually. Comes into play. Even in a conventional lab where it's not such an automated process, the stiffness of the platform is still very important, largely because of the SEMs and TEMs are designed with pneumatic isolators built into them. So, in that case, we don't want to, we're very careful, and we need to understand the type of instrument and how it's made so that we know not to support such a microscope with another pneumatic platform or pneumatic isolator. So in that case, again, active vibration control that's inherently stiff. We call it a hard mount active system, is utilized in that case. So not only for automated tools, but also for some of the advanced SEM and certainly TEMs.
Now, obviously, there's a relationship here between the microscope, the use case, and the vibration control solution, right? And those are all usually, typically determined by different entities. You know what I mean? All that to say, the environment is not producing the same microscope, nor is the vibration control system produced by the same company, for example. So I'm curious if y'all ever run into, for example, microscope manufacturers typically having some kind of specification for floor vibration, right? Do you ever run into that where you'll actually have the manufacturers themselves sort of give direction on, here is your microscope, we typically recommend this kind of vibration solution, or, meeting this kind of criteria or specification? Or is it much more custom and sort of, non-standard? What do y'all see?
Sure. That's a great question, Daniel. Pretty much with an electron microscope, all of the manufacturers are going to go in and do what we call a site survey before an instrument is purchased. They all understand very, very well that the performance of these modern microscopes really needs an ultra stable and ultra clean environment. So before they ever even think about installing an instrument, a site survey will be done. All of the microscope manufacturers are capable of doing that on their own. Sometimes they come to us and ask us to do it. We have a slightly higher level of expertise. And they have very well developed specifications for what an environment has to be like to know that their microscope will be successful. So they absolutely have limits of vibration, of magnetic fields, of acoustic noise. And, at that point, we partner pretty well with all of the OEMs, with all the manufacturers, and they can generally give a rough idea, or even beyond that, a pretty good idea of what type of system they think will be needed in most cases. And if they're not sure, they may come to us and say, hey, can you send in TMC? Can you send in your experts? And we'd like to hear your opinion on what you think we need to do to meet this requirement. As these microscopes get better and better in performance, as more applications develop, unfortunately, what we're seeing is more microscopes being put into less ideal situations. People try to put a high-res TEM on a second floor in a building, for example, which obviously is not ideal, but fortunately, quite often we can deal with it with the right vibration solution. So it really does come down to a partnership. The microscope people understand vibration pretty well. Obviously, when they feel like they're over their heads, they certainly come to us, and we can come in and talk directly to the customer. But it's a partnership, and it's truly about understanding the requirements of that instrument and being able to quantify, the dynamics of the environment that we're going to try to install it in.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, Daniel. Mike brought up some really good points about the manufacturers. They all have their own spec. And you asked about custom specs. Are there standard specs? And I think at the beginning of the discussion, you mentioned VC curves. So VC curves are vibration criteria standard. VC stands for vibration criteria. And it's a standard that was actually developed in the 80s. Colin Gordon and Eric Unger developed the standard, because prior to that, there was really no standard. So it was really good to kind of define that standard without going into too much of the detail. But basically, it set a vibration level in terms of velocity that was appropriate, say, for a 40x optical microscope, compared to, say, maybe an SEM that needs to get up to 100,000x magnification. And many of the manufacturers of microscopes use that as their spec, but not all. So many have, done maybe deeper analysis or characteristic of their frame. But I just wanted to kind of address that we are often, looking at vibration data from a facility, from an environment, and comparing that to a custom spec, or the VC curves. And even when manufacturers have their own custom spec, we'll still use the VC standard as the common language because there's architects involved, there's lab designers, there's facility managers, and most of the people who have experience dealing with imaging suites in life science buildings or in semiconductor facilities, a lot of them are familiar with the VC curve. So it's nice to have that standard. But TMC has a lot of experience in not only measuring floor vibration, but, analyzing that data and comparing it to these custom specs from, there's many, many different manufacturers. So there's always something different coming our way in terms of these, the specification and how to address that.
But let's get a little bit more technical talking about some of those considerations too. When selecting a microscope, obviously it's essential to account for the environment's vibration levels. Right? What is going to be causing vibration in this environment? Is it other machinery? Is it construction nearby? Are you in a windy area? Are you, on a higher floor where there might be some building movement? Right. And so this obviously will determine some of the instrument's vibration requirements, and we can measure some of this through vibration criteria, VC curves. Can you explain the importance of vibration criteria curves, VC curves in this process, and how you would even approach for someone out there who's, investing in new solutions, or they're retooling their existing production or research ecosystem, right? How would you even begin to approach determining whether a site meets the necessary conditions for microscope installation in the first place? So again, explain the importance of VC curves for us, and then how you approach determining if a site is correct for an installation.
Yeah, sure. So again, the nice thing about the VC criteria curves is that they're labeled alphabetically, which is nice. But like say VCA compared to say VCG, there's a big difference in the level of vibration that's acceptable to meet a VCG environment compared to say a VCA or VCB, C, D, and so on. So as the letters go up in the alphabet, that equates to a much quieter environment in terms of vibration. Mike mentioned earlier that the manufacturers survey the environments. They want to make sure the environment is good. And that's really the key, is going in to measure the floor vibration of the facility where these microscopes will be installed. And using the right kind of equipment to do that. Vibration comes in many forms. I mean, there's periodic or coherent vibration that might be coming from a fan or an HVAC system. And then there's, what's very common everywhere is just random, incoherent noise everywhere, every floor. So, understanding how to measure and see the different types of vibration in the data is really important. And what's also important is, measuring down to very low frequencies, because the microscopes, I think we mentioned earlier, are very, very sensitive, in particular to low frequency, low amplitude building vibration. And that can be difficult to measure if you don't understand what what you're measuring and why you're measuring it. So understanding kind of, what the requirements are of the microscope, that specification, and, understanding the limitations or capabilities of your measuring equipment. So, for example, if you need to measure at very low frequencies and you're measuring over a very wide bandwidth out to, say, 400 hertz, well, you might not see what you need to see at 1 hertz or 2 hertz. So there's, tricks to kind of, really capture really what's happening at 1 hertz and 2 hertz. By changing the resolution of the spectrum analyzer and things like that, and also using the right kind of sensors. So, we've worked we do it ourselves. We work with consultants that are out there. The manufacturers themselves have a lot of experience. But that's the key. Again, going to that survey. And not only, there's a lot of clients that we work with that are designing a new facility, and they set out to design the facility to a certain level of vibration, and then measure it when it's built. And so the as-built vibration measurements are performed, and they get that baseline vibration. Inevitably, vibration levels will increase as the facility becomes more mature, populated with other machines, foot traffic, people walking through the building, construction outside. I think you mentioned earlier traffic. We need to measure that facility at that time when it is mature and populated, because there will be a different level of vibration. So really kind of understanding all that is important. It's not just a snapshot. It's not just one measurement. And it's not, one set of parameters for that measurement fits all. It's understanding all these different important aspects of, the microscope, the facility, and the measurement that all comes into play.
It might be difficult to conceive of the right way to gather that data in the first place. A lot of these companies may not have that personnel on hand naturally. So I imagine a lot of the folks y'all work with are either working with y'all to do some kind of site survey, or maybe they're working with third-party vibration consultants to come do a site survey to gather that data, to put a little focus behind, we know what we need to capture data-wise to inform, the right solution, to make sure we meet specifications, right? Tell us a little bit about any experience y'all have had doing site surveys yourself or working with third-party consultants. Do y'all typically encounter any consistent challenges in that process that make it difficult to gather the right data? And how do you address those typically?
I don't so much anymore, but I used to do a lot of vibration surveys myself. But TMC, the service team has grown over the years. All of our service team members have the capability to perform surveys, and we often are doing surveys either as a service to a client, or also as part of our installations. We follow in installations and do vibration surveys. So we certainly have a lot of experience. And one of the things I always say is, before doing a measurement, know what to expect and is it repeatable? Because those two simple things can really kind of reveal something that's not right in the data. The challenges I mentioned earlier almost are always there. It's how do I measure at very low frequencies and get really what I need in that 1 hertz to 5 hertz range, which is so critical for the microscope and so prevalent in building vibration. I would say that's a big one. And then the other one, understanding that there is random vibration and it's not just periodic vibration, and understanding the differences in that and things like power spectral density instead of just power. So really you're kind of measuring the density of vibration and then expressing the vibration in the right way. And that's, again, going back to VC curves. It's one of the nice things about that is that it's expressed in RMS, root mean square, and it's third octave. So it averages the data. It's in a common language. So that does help quite a bit. But those are the typical challenges that we see and how we address those.
Okay, so we've kind of touched on this, but I just want to open up dialogue on it again. Vibration from both internal and external sources, right? Other machinery, other movement around a facility internally or externally, right? Traffic, public transit, construction, geography, weather, right? Like these things can significantly impact the performance of sensitive equipment like microscopes. So I'm curious if you could describe for me how you would assess or mitigate the impact of those vibrations, right? Especially when there's both. How do you actually determine where the source of those vibrations are per se and how they're impacting the actual machinery? Again, how would you assess and mitigate the impact of a mix of vibrations, internal and external?
Sure. And in answering that, I'd like to focus on the vibration isolation solutions that address the two different things, internal and external. So, an SEM has vibration in itself. Any frame, any structure is naturally vibrating at some frequency, and SEMs and TEMs therefore have isolators built into them. So the column, the electron beam column inside the microscope is supported by its own internal, either pneumatic or steel springs or rubber springs. So they're very good at isolating at high frequencies. To address external vibration, and we've already talked about, how to measure that, how to analyze that, where it's coming from. It can be coming from everything you mentioned, and it is. Well, that external vibration is very often at very low frequencies. And that's why an external platform or external base is needed to support these microscopes in the environment in which they need to be installed. As Mike mentioned earlier, maybe a second floor or even a third floor and higher. The internal vibration isolation system of the microscope does its job, but it's not going to cancel the very low frequency building vibration. And that's the external vibration coming from machines in the building, traffic outside, foot traffic, that the external base under the microscope mitigates.
Now, have you ever encountered a situation where, an external factor, let's say a train or consistent construction, did actually interfere with lab equipment, right? Do you have an anecdotal story or a practical example you could give? Because kind of hard to uproot public transit or tell construction to go away. So, the solution is going to be a little more nuanced and more to do with mitigating vibrations rather than maybe just like actually addressing the root of the issue. So how does your team address some of those challenges?
Yeah, it actually comes up quite often. One case I really enjoyed working with the customer on was they had an imaging suite in the city in Portland. Oftentimes the universities are in cities. It's where all the activity is. It's where they want to be. And we had a customer who, and Mike mentioned, I think, sample prep earlier, but so he had an FIB tool, focused ion beam tool, that was being used to prepare a sample. And every time the streetcar went by, it ruined it. It basically kind of flew off the sample and ruined the sample prep. He had to stop what he was doing. So he had the train schedule on his wall, and he would have to look at the schedule and say, okay, it's 1:05. I've got till 1:30 that the next train comes by. I got to do my sample prep. I got to do it now. I got to have it done by 1:30. Otherwise, I got to start all over again. So they called us. We went in to do the vibration assessment, looked at the environment. Okay, he explained what was going on. And it's basically a very low frequency coming through the ground. Again, that the internal isolators in the microscope don't take care of, and the wrong kind of platform underneath the microscope won't address either, because it needs to be a very stiff, active hard mount type isolator that's going to measure that vibration, cancel that low frequency vibration. And once we worked with him and installed the right kind of base under the microscope, he was no longer affected by the train. And the nice thing about that is just his the throughput with that tool increased, I think, by a factor of 4. The usability of the whole lab was significantly increased. So it was just, really beneficial to this particular, not only that one tool, but the whole lab greatly benefited from, addressing the problem correctly.
Okay, now let's flip this scenario a little bit. I'll step in the shoes of, a research operation or a manufacturing operation for semiconductors, whatever it might be. I already have a microscope. It's already being used. How would I know if my work is already being impacted by vibration that I haven't controlled yet, right? That I have not mitigated or accounted for, right? Where do you start if you've already started? You already have a site and it's operational, but maybe there's vibration you have not investigated into, drawn data on, and come up with a solution for?
Yeah, great question, right? And there's a couple quick answers to it. And the first one is most people that buy these microscopes, right? These are not small purchases. They've made very large, significant investments to buy this equipment. And in the process of purchasing this equipment, most of these customers, you probably took your prized critical sample and you went and visited a bunch of manufacturers and you had them prove to you the type of performance that microscope is capable of giving you, right? The type of information that you're going to get back from that instrument when you buy it. So now you've bought that instrument. It's now in your facility. It's set up, and you sit down and you try to get that type of information. And you find that you're limited. You're limited in resolution, or you're limited in magnification, or your image quality simply isn't what you got when you looked at the instrument before. And, that's a very quick sign that, wait a minute, something's not right? The instrument manufacturers and their demo facilities obviously have done the utmost to deal with any environmental issues. So they're showing you, what you could call an entitlement, right? An absolute performance peak from the instrument. So I think that's the place to start. For smaller issues, what I always like to tell people is look for image artifacts. And typically they're repeated image artifacts. Samples can do weird things in a microscope. So if something happens one time, you don't worry too much about it. But suddenly if you start seeing sawtooth edges along a straight feature, or if you start to see waviness in your image during a scan, these are immediate signs that there's some sort of magnetic field or vibration issue that's affecting your instrument. And, Wes's story is a great way to think about it. A lot of times these are periodic. You work on the instrument at night, you come into the lab at 10 p.m. when it's quiet, everything's beautiful. You come in the next day, you try to work at 11 a.m. when everybody in all the labs around you, above you, behind you is working, and your performance is not at the same level. So these are all very clear-cut indications of something in the environment impacting the performance of the instrument. So those are the places to start, and that probably covers 90% of what happens, right? These are very complex instruments, and obviously the performance of the environment can be incredibly complex. So repeated image artifacts are really the key thing to look for, and simply not reaching levels of performance that the instrument is capable of. That's where I would start.
Okay, here's another practical example. Likely our semiconductor audience is going to find some familiarity in this situation. A raised floor in a facility, right? You've got your floor, there's an artificial floor on top of it, and you've got cables, or you've got, a dirty environment underneath, whatever it might be. You've got a raised floor in your facility. That's going to introduce some unique vibration challenges. I'm curious how that changes installing a vibration control platform. Any nuances in that strategy or in the considerations?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the raised floor that you mentioned, semiconductor fabs, and certainly clean rooms, we'll sometimes see in a life science facility as well. So the raised floor, great for people, walking across the floor, supporting electronics, other, robotic devices, things like that. But any imaging equipment, anything that's sensitive at all, cannot be installed on top of the raised floor. So much like any other environment or case that we talked about, we have to go in and measure the vibration on the subfloor, not on the raised floor, but on the subfloor, that concrete slab that's below the raised floor. So understanding the vibration levels on that is what's important. And yeah, to answer the root of the question, TMC's been working with that type of customer for 25 years, really. And it's a building block solution that consists of a clean room compatible platform top supported by the isolators. And we design that structure underneath the platform to match so that the overall height matches the height of the raised floor. So it's actually kind of cool. I love it because, you can walk into this fab or clean room space you don't even know that the platform's there because it's flush with the raised floor height. Our marketing team might not love it because you don't even know our products in the fab, but it's very low impact ergonomically. And that's what the users of these facilities want. Not only address without question the vibration problem, but also, no increase in height to that raised floors. They can roll the tool, the machine right onto that platform. We design and precision engineer and manufacture that platform to fit the footprint of the microscope. And there's many different types of microscopes. So that comes in to be very important because we don't want to take up more floor space than necessary. So we take all that into account and have existing designs because there's many different tool models that we've worked with over the years. But yeah, it's a somewhat complex problem, but one that we really know how to approach and have that building block solution to meet the needs of those types of customers as well.
Mike, from selling and curating the right solutions into typical lab environments, are there any other considerations you've guided your clients on when helping them decide on the right vibration isolation solution? If we're talking ergonomics, height, ease of installation, some of the dynamics typical in a lab environment. What else, is typically influencing that decision?
Yeah, great question. Right, I've been lucky enough to visit microscopy labs all over the world, and there's a lot of diversity. But anybody who's been to a decent number of these labs is going to realize a lot of them are in basements or sub basements, or they're in very small rooms that were specifically designed for that instrument. So, ease of installation is critical. You got a microscope that is a room size instrument, hundreds of pounds. Now we've got a vibration solution that we want to apply to that instrument. We have to figure out, how do we get that into the building? How do we get that down, 2 floors into a sub basement? How do we lift up the instrument? How do we get the vibration system under the instrument? So, installation is something that we put a lot of effort in, both in terms of making it smooth for the customer, but also in terms of designing our equipment. Wes said something a few minutes ago, right? Trying to match our footprint to the instrument. A lot of these microscopes are in rooms, like I said, designed for them. They also have ancillary equipment. There might be vacuum pumps. There might be X-ray systems. There might be electronics for cameras. We have to make sure that our space, our solution does not add space to that instrument. So that's a very, very big deal. Ergonomics, like you mentioned, Daniel, what an important thing that people don't think about at first, but the operator in some of these places might run this microscope for 8 hours a day. If you suddenly come in here with a solution that changes the height of the column, but does not impact the console where the operator sits, you've changed his or her, movements constantly. So these are things we're very well aware of. We have to understand, how does the operator operate on the instrument? How does the operator interact with the instrument? What can we do to make sure our solutions are effective of space, easy enough to install? How do we make sure that this is a solution that's a positive across the board? So it's something that we work very, very hard at doing and making sure that we fit in a way that, in essence, we're invisible to the customer, right? The customer at the end of the day wants to see the performance of the microscope. They don't necessarily want to pay attention to our system every day, right? So we don't want it to impact their daily life. So all of those things you mentioned, footprint, height, ease of installation, ergonomics, every one of them are something that we think about in each product that we produce. And when I visit a new facility for the first time and talk to them about their problems, these are important things that we record and we make sure that we're solving, right? How do we make sure that the solution is the right solution for what they're trying to do? And fortunately, TMC's got a ton of experience with people like Wes that, hey, we've tried something like that before, or hey, we've run into that situation before. So we're pretty confident that we can come up with an ideal solution to address those issues.
Now, real quick, let's make a distinction here too. Are there off-the-shelf solutions for microscopes in this discussion, right? In the specific environments we're talking about, are there any that you would, or that you typically find yourself working with, or is everything a custom design? You're always finding ones that are fine-tuned specifically to that use case, to that lab, to that specific, application. What do we typically see out there?
Yeah, for sure. We do talk a lot about custom and the importance of that and being able to adapt to specific microscopes and footprints. But about 20 years ago, TMC introduced SEM-base. So what we did is we looked at all the commercial SEMs, and we realized that they all have a pretty common footprint, not exactly the same, but roughly like 2.5 feet, maybe 3 feet wide by 3.5 feet deep, roughly speaking. We were able to design a base that fits 99%, at least 90% of the commercial SEMs on the market. And, then that's a really nice off-the-shelf design. We can deliver it quickly. Again, it fits almost all commercial SEMs. It's relatively easy to install without a forklift or, a construction team. It's fairly lightweight. I mean, we have a lot of mass. There's a lot of steel. There's always these bases are heavy. You can't, one person can't just walk into a room carrying it under their arm, of course, but, relatively speaking, very easy to install, get it into the elevators and down to the basement level that Mike mentioned earlier, fairly easily. So that's a really nice off the shelf solution. And then in terms of the, like a raised floor application, I mentioned building blocks. The core of that solution is something we call stasis. And those modules are effectively off the shelf. We're custom designing the height of the risers to support it at the right height. The platform is manufactured or engineered and made to order to fit the microscope. But the isolators themselves are off the shelf. And that's nice too, because that keeps our costs down at very efficient in terms of manufacturing. And we still can deliver fairly quickly. But those tend to be, heavy platforms that need to be, to fit the microscope. Much different than, say, SEM-base in a conventional lab. So that's a really good example of something that's standard.
I'm curious if y'all have any relationships with the microscope suppliers, right? Or I guess maybe a better way to frame that up is, do any microscope suppliers sell vibration control equipment as part of the whole package, right? When, let's say I'm a lab, I buy a microscope from them, right? Or is it always a separate endeavor, always working directly through, a TMC, for example?
Yeah, it's we have great relationships with all the microscope manufacturers, right? Half of my job is spending time visiting with them, talking to them, and understanding, what they're doing with their equipment down the road. And as we mentioned earlier, right, the performance of these microscopes is getting better and better every year. So we have to be plugged in very closely with them to make sure that the solutions we offer still work or continue to work better with their new instruments that they're coming out with. So we're plugged in very, very well with them. As to how they get sold, honestly, a lot of times we leave that up to the customer. A lot of our customers want to do one-stop shopping and place one purchase order with the microscope vendor. And then the microscope vendor can come to us and buy one of our solutions and take it. A lot of our customers are the other way. They simply say to the microscope manufacturer, we'll get a site survey. We'll go take care of the vibration isolation purchase ourselves, and they might come directly to us. Of course, when they come directly to us, we interface with the microscope company anyways. We don't like surprises in this industry. So we keep these relationships close, and it's really what works best for the customer. It depends on how their money was funded, what type of organization they are. Do they have a relationship with us directly? Wes mentioned some sites earlier. We've got multiple systems at key customers or key government labs. They just call us immediately when they're looking at buying an instrument and, hey, come out and take a look at where we're thinking about putting this new microscope. What do you think of this location and how does it look? We're looking at this brand of microscope. Do you guys have a system that works with it? And they'll just do everything with us directly. So it works both ways, and we're happy to support the customer or the OEM, whichever way they choose to go.
All right, a few more FAQ style questions here before we wrap things up. So obviously there's a timeline here in terms of determining you need a microscope, getting it shipped, getting it installed, and beginning to actually use it. And in that entire timeline, there's a necessity to determine what are the VC curves, what are the realities in my environment that are going to determine vibration control and mitigation. So how long before I take delivery of my microscope, let's say, should I consider addressing any vibration issues, right? When should that process start alongside, parallel to, or in conjunction with choosing a microscope?
Yeah, Mike, you might know from actual user experience, but I always say, earlier the better. At least consider it at the time you're considering which microscope to purchase, but sometimes even sooner. We have a lot, like Mike said, the microscopes are getting more and more sophisticated. Some of these large TEMs, clients are designing facilities that are purpose built. For that microscope. So you really want to be considering environmental solutions at the design phase or sooner, because you might design your facility differently to accommodate, say, a platform to support a large TEM. You might want to build a raised floor in that facility that makes it much easier to install a vibration isolation platform. And then there's different approaches as well in terms of supporting the large TEMs. But really, the sooner the better, not only for budget reasons, but for, design reasons related to the facility. And, again, you want to be measuring the vibration well before you take delivery of the microscope, so that you can, plan ahead and, explore the options, understand the solutions, and ensure that you're really installing the right solution that's not only going to address the vibration levels that you see in the survey data to future-proof against, vibration levels that inevitably are going to increase after the facility is populated, or there's a construction project next door or even a mile away. We had a client who, a large factory was being built a mile away and they were being impacted by that project. So you don't want to have to deal with that later after the microscope is installed. You'd have to actually deinstall it, move it, then bring in the platform. You not only want a solution that's going to address what you're seeing now in terms of the vibration signature of the building, but give yourself plenty of margin, plenty of headroom in that, so that you can be confident that you're addressing possible increases in the vibration levels in the future.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Wes. If you wait until your instrument's delivered, you're in big trouble already, right? And if it's a new facility being built, we encourage them to talk to our experts here about small choices that could be made early on that would make a big difference down the road. And if it's an existing facility, a lot of our current customers reach out to us to help them make decisions, maybe not on which microscope to buy. We try to stay out of that, obviously, but where do they want to install it? I talked to a customer just last week that's going to buy 3 different microscopes. Each of those has different vibration requirements based on the type of instrument it is. And their question is, where should we put each one? Which room is the best, because we want to put the highest resolution tool there. This instrument's not quite as demanding, so it can go in this room over here that maybe has it's closer to the elevator or whatever other feature may be. So fortunately, the microscope vendors all understand this. They want to get in early as well, or they want to send us in early as well, because the last thing anybody wants is to deliver a multi-million-dollar tool and not get the performance, not get the solution we were hoping for. So as early as possible, right? And I like it even when people are applying for funding. Reach out and tell us you're thinking about buying a microscope, and let us come in and stop in and talk to you and look at the facility and look at the options to where you might put it, or what possible solutions are there. TMC brings a lot of experience to the table, right? And most people are lucky if they buy 2 or 3 microscopes in their life. Wes deals with 4 or 5, microscope purchases a month, and he's got a lot more experience trying to figure this out than the average customer does. So take advantage of the experience is what we try to tell people, and let us help you now. It makes everything easier down the road.
Let's talk about down the road here for a second too. Another question I'm sure y'all get is about the long term of mitigating vibration. You invest in the right piece of equipment for your current VC curves, for your current vibration issues, and then things change. The foundation settles a little differently in the building. New construction pops up. New internal dynamics in the building pop up. So, a lot of people, I'm sure, experience this, that vibration gets worse over time in a facility. Is that true? Why is that? And how should that even be, made sense of strategically for folks listening?
Yeah, for sure it's true. Vibration levels do typically get worse over time. When the facility is built, the vibration, that's the best it can be, really. Once the facility, I would say it's mostly due to traffic in the building, foot traffic mainly, but also street traffic outside and construction that I mentioned earlier. But as the building is populated with other instruments, HVAC certainly impacts the vibration of the building and the noise in the building. And certainly these things are considered in the design phase, but we see it all the time. And there's been studies done that are published about vibration levels in the as-built phase, and then when it's populated and mature, the vibration levels increase. And that's why I mentioned earlier, it's really important to think about how you're going to mitigate the current vibration levels, but also think about this phenomenon that the vibration levels do get worse, and that you are considering a solution that even if the vibration levels at the time of install meet spec, because of this issue, you want to really think and consider of installing a vibration isolation platform under the microscope at that time, even if you meet spec, because like I said, as the facility is populated and the vibration levels get worse, either as time goes on or at different times of the day, and the use of this microscope is over long periods of the day, you want to account for all of these scenarios without thinking about it at a later time or dealing with it at a later time, because it can be very impactful to shut down the microscope and reinstall it after the vibration platform is installed. So yeah, that's a very important issue that we deal with a lot.
All right, y'all. Last question for you. This is just a slight detour to close things out. But what if my facility has a problem with, let's say, magnetic fields, or it's really loud, right? Not vibration related, but still related to impacting smooth operations. Do you have any solutions for those problems? Y'all dabble in any other, environmental mitigation? And if so, what do those look like and how do they fit into that ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned magnetic fields. So that any electron microscope is not only has a vibration specification that needs to be met, but they also have a magnetic field specification. So that is also something that we get involved with. We have a solution for mitigating magnetic fields. It basically, pushes the magnetic field away from the electron beam. Very standard design, very simple to install. But that maybe we need to have, a whole nother discussion on that. Definitely something that we can address. And, it's the same customers, the same microscopes, not optical microscopes, but the electron beam, the E-beams are sensitive to magnetic fields. And then you mentioned acoustics. Can be a bit more challenging to address acoustics. Again, maybe a whole nother discussion on that. But when it comes to TMC has 30 years of experience of designing and manufacturing acoustic enclosures. There's so many things to consider when it comes to acoustic enclosures, but there's also other ways to address acoustics. Treatment on the walls, treatment, in the ceiling are definitely common. Not our expertise in terms of room treatment, and oftentimes rooms are designed to be, acoustically quiet. So there's different ways to approach that. Own set of challenges. We have experience with acoustic enclosures, typically for specific instruments. But yeah, those are both things that we consider. And when we do surveys, we measure not only vibration, but we also measure magnetic fields and acoustics.
All right, y'all. I think that does it for our conversation today. Again, we've been covering a whole swath of strategies, relevant, practical examples, and relationships, whether those are within the industry or relationships between different kinds of vibrations and environmental issues that impact research or production, semiconductor fab, for example. Again, speaking to microscope-specific vibration solutions. This has been great. Thank you for the two of you, giving your time today to go over all of this, get so in the weeds with me. To wrap things up, if you could point our audience in the right direction, where should they go if they want to actually tap into some of these solutions, right? Work with TMC or at least get some consultation on how to move forward. Where can we point them?
You can reach out to us directly. You can go to our website, www.techmfg.com. Feel free to Google Wes Wigglesworth and see what you find there. But call us. You can email me directly or Mike, any one of us on the team, our applications team, our service team for surveys. But I would say that's the best way to reach us is through our website.
Fantastic. Easy enough. All right, y'all. That does it. Thank you again for your time. Again, folks, we've been chatting with Wes Wigglesworth, Senior Applications Manager for TMC, and Mike Coy, Sales Manager for the Americas for TMC. Wes, Mike, it's been a real pleasure learning from y'all today and getting all these insights. Thanks again, and looking forward to some future conversations.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a good one.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of Vibrations. If you like what you heard and saw and you want to join some future episodes, right, or you want to tap into our entire ecosystem of previous conversations, you can find more on our website, techmfg.com. You can also subscribe to Vibrations on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Vibrations.